Either's totally fine, or even a video game would be fine if you want.
How many of you watch football? A couple of people, right? It was so nice to have football back. I was so excited. I didn't get to watch a lot of it because my kids had sports like all weekend, but I was very excited to have it be back. Though I think I lost in every single fantasy football league this week, but that's okay. Who's counting, right? That's all right. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm like fighting the end of this like sinus infection that I've had for like a week. It's completely not contagious, but I'm at that point where like it's making me cough and making my life difficult. And it's like ever since COVID, coughing is so taboo, right? That like I'm afraid to cough. I don't know if you have any, does anyone else feel that way out in the world? Like it's like the second anyone coughs, I like glare at them. And now like and when I have a cough, I'm like, don't glare at me. I'm so sorry. So I'm doing my best. We'll see how I do. I've been talking a lot today, so hopefully it doesn't just progressively get worse as we go. But we'll see. Hopefully it'll be okay. I'm also been screaming a lot at sports, so like that doesn't help. It was like a whole weekend of softball and soccer out in the heat. Another thought, but it left me. I wrote this up there. I'm going to talk about that at the end today. The second part of the paper. I'll talk about that in the last few minutes that we have. Just to kind of keep it on your mind. It is due on Wednesday. So more on that later, but I wrote it up there for you. I did give you a homework assignment just to wrap up chapter 3 here today. So I want you to get into groups just for like 2-3 minutes. Just whatever's convenient around you, a couple of people, share your thoughts and focus on, did you agree or disagree? Right? You should have the same main points, but share your thoughts for a couple of minutes. We'll talk about it really quickly and then I'll collect it from you. Find a few people around you, go ahead and chat about it just for a couple of minutes. Oh, hi. Yeah. That's fine.
I couldn't.
We're good. Really weird. You can't take, you know.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about it together. Did any of you experience it? Yes. I messed up on that one. Yeah. So I'm curious, right? And again, this is a polar opposite perspective of what we are kind of embracing all semester. What do you think? Agree, disagree? What are your thoughts on the kind of number two here? What did you think? Do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? A little bit of both? Is that a hand? Yeah.
I think I have to disagree
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't like know what it's like, I think, to be someone who's neurodivergent or who has one of these mental conditions.
Okay.
Like, I mean, like for me, him basically saying, well, everyone else struggle to smile. For me, that was kind of like a little tap in the face.
Yeah.
And I know it's like 1950s era psychology,
Mm-hmm.
but it still comes out as kind of dated.
Oh, for sure. And you know what? As I mentioned, he wrote a follow-up to his book just about 5 years ago. He still felt the same way.
I mean, still, it's amazing that he's still alive.
Yeah, right. Right. He's hung in there a long time, right? Other thoughts? What do you think? Anybody else? Different perspective? Agree? Disagree? Yeah.
I disagree with what he's saying, but I did find his points really
Sure.
interesting. I do think that mental illnesses are very real and something that like so many people struggle with.
Yeah.
But what I have noticed is that there are more people like claiming to have mental illnesses and like desiring to have mental illnesses. And I think that goes along with what he was saying as like normal human struggles just being attributed to an illness,
Mhm.
which in some cases it genuinely is. But I think because of how much it has been talked about on social media, it's become this thing that people want to have, which is like kind of weird.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's really good that people are talking about it and destigmatizing it, but at the same time, it's like. Becomes
too far that way too,
Yeah.
right?
Who wants to act like it's like people like who wants to actually have a mental illness? Like I wonder like, oh, I wonder if you already have one at that point if you're wanting it, so if you're wanting it.
Sure, and I think maybe too, just in terms of wanting one of like, oh, that justifies like everything that I'm experiencing and feeling, but it gives it a label and a meaning and so on. And one thing that I think I appreciated that he's saying is we all do struggle with life, right? Like life is hard. Crying as we say that, or no, I'm just kidding. It's like my soccer team, they all cry, right? But life is hard, right? Like we all struggle at times. And some people struggle more than others. And so like I appreciate points of what he's saying, but I imagine a lot of you know someone, whether it's yourself or someone in your life who has a mental illness. And it can kind of feel like a slap in the face to say like, well, that's not actually real or valid. I don't know, any other thoughts that you have? Yeah.
I think there's two sides to it. There's a medical side.
Right.
Treatment and people being in hospitals and getting
Mhm.
stabilized. But then there's the emotional side, and so many people don't like the feel of like antipsychotics.
Mhm.
And then they stop. But yeah, accepting that, like, say you have schizophrenia, not so easy.
Sure. Yeah. Right. And I think too, what he is saying a lot from the medical side is that a lot of these disorders that we're going to start today, finally, right, have a very medical component to them. So can we purely call them psychological disorders if they're caused by a physical issue, right? And so I wanted you to have a perspective on the other side, because it's important to know, again, that this isn't a perfect system. There's a lot of people that really fundamentally disagree with this whole diagnosing and mental illness idea. And so I think it's important to see both sides. Any other thoughts or comments or anything else before I collect those from you? But if you want to go ahead and pass those up to me, make sure your first and last name is on there. Collect them.
Okay, there is not a difference. What was that? Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. Are you excited? Ready to get anxious? Hopefully not, but yeah, right. Yay, anxiety, right? Well, we finally get to the disorders today, which is super exciting. That's kind of the reason we're here, right? That's what we're learning about the entire rest of the semester. And we're going to start with anxiety disorders, which are the most common group of disorders by a mile. A lot of people struggle with anxiety, and we're going to talk about some of the bigger ones. And what we'll do with each one is we'll look at some of the criteria to have it, right? There are diagnostic criteria for every disorder that you have to meet in order to be diagnosed. And then we'll look at some of the causes and some of the treatments. And I want to say one thing before we get into these, and sometimes I forget to say this, but it's an important note. As psychology students, right, as we cover these, you're going to have a moment, I guarantee it's going to happen in here, where you're like, I have every disorder that we've just covered, right? That is not possible, just so you know. As we go through these, if you're like, that sounds a lot like me, look into it more, maybe it fits. But we all have elements of every single disorder, right, on a spectrum. So you might have a little bit of everything that we talk about. I promise you, you don't have all these disorders. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It's a very common psychology phenomenon to think you have everything that we cover. And I promise you, you don't. But it's very likely that a lot of you know someone with one of these disorders. They're very common disorders. So we'll get into these today. One really important distinction to make here, and I hope I don't offend anyone with the picture, but I thought it was funny. Sorry if it's offensive in any way. But anxiety versus anxiety disorders. Right now, every single one of us experiences anxiety. Anxiety is normal. It's typical. It's something that is identifiable and appropriate, and it passes with time. Okay, so anxiety is something that we all experience. I would say it would be abnormal to never experience anxiety. What we're going to focus on in here are anxiety disorders. So when people have extreme, unrealistic, or debilitating anxiety, it affects your life in some way. Think of those D's that we talked about. Right, so anxiety, to give you just kind of an example here. So before the first day of school, right, before the first class, I don't sleep at all. I'm up like all night, anxious. Is the technology thinking, is the technology going to work? Are my pants going to fall off? Am I going to cough the entire time? Like I could go on. Am I going to have enough, seats for everybody? Is the power going to go out? I can come up with a million things that are going to go wrong on day one. And I don't sleep very well the night before because I'm nervous. I haven't met any of you yet, and I don't know what to expect. I would say that's normal. But if week 5, we're 5 weeks into the semester, which is just wild to think. If by week 5, I'm still not sleeping before every night of class because I'm so nervous, I'd say I have gone from normal anxiety to something more down here. Okay, it's normal to be anxious about a test, right? Your grade depends on it. But if it's so debilitating, your anxiety, that you can't answer the questions, you've gone to a different level of anxiety. So again, one's very common and normal, and one is more kind of what we're focusing on in here, which are these different disorders that you can have. And the first one that we'll start with is called generalized anxiety disorder, GAD for short. Okay.
And somebody who has GAD, like I think this picture kind of captures it, right? You worry about everything all of the time. It's very general, right? So you don't have like one specific fear or anxiety. It's everything making you anxious, right? And so sometimes we call this person neurotic, right? They're constantly on edge and filled with anxiety and dread and worry. There's a couple of criteria that you have to have in order to be diagnosed with this. And I'm going to write some of the big ones up here on the board. So you have to have worry and anxiety about a variety of topics. About a variety of things. For at least 6 months. And you'll see that with every single disorder that we cover, there's a period of time, there's that duration piece. So this isn't like a short-term thing. It's at least 6 months long or more, right? It can be more for sure. And then you have to have 3 or more of the following symptoms. So that's typically what you'll see. There's like a criteria for time, and then a whole bunch of symptoms, and you have to have a certain number of them in order to be diagnosed. We call these the diagnostic criteria for generalized anxiety disorder. So some of the things that you would have to have a lot of being on edge or restless. And it's due to anxiety, not to something else, right? So you're kind of constantly restless, you're not able to relax. You're on edge, kind of hyper vigilant, we could call it. You're tired all the time. Tired or fatigued. Anxiety takes up a lot of energy. Okay, so when you're constantly stressing and worrying about things, you're going to be tired because it oftentimes affects your sleep as well. If you're always anxious, it's difficult for you to sleep. And that's one of the things that we often see here as well, difficulty sleeping. Due to anxiety, right? Laying in bed kind of like that, right? Like worrying about everything from the day, worrying about everything that could possibly happen. Other things, you have a hard time concentrating, so poor concentration. Right? Your mind is very like racing because it's worrying about all this other stuff. So it's hard to focus and concentrate. You're irritable. Oftentimes having muscle aches and pain. When you're stressed or anxious, you tend to like get a lot of muscle tension, which can cause muscle pain and headaches and so on. Those are all the like really big ones. But this individual, someone who has this, again, you're worrying about everything. Like as you're sitting here right now, what if my pencil runs out of lead? What if the lights go off, right? Like, what if I need to leave? Am I going to be able to do that? Do I have enough paper in here? What am I doing later? Like your mind is just constantly going, worried about everything. And that's very, very typical with this disorder. There's also 2 more criteria, and every single disorder has these 2 criteria. So I'll write them up here once and then probably never again, but there's 2 criteria for every disorder. It has to cause clinically significant distress or impairment. So everyone worries about stuff, right? But it has to be severe enough to cause what's called clinically significant distress or impairment. It's affecting your life. It's affecting your ability to live your life the way that you would like to. And the other thing is it cannot be due to a general medical condition or the use of a substance. So if you have a lot of anxiety because you're drinking too much caffeine or using like amphetamines or something like that, then that nullifies this. So every single disorder has to cause clinically significant distress or impairment, and every single disorder cannot be due to a general medical condition or the use of a substance, except substance disorders, which we'll get to in chapter 10, right, which are caused by the use of a substance. So again, this individual often just worrying, constantly taking a toll because they're worried about everything in a very general way. I have a clip of an example of this, and it's not perfect, but I think it fits really, really well. I don't know if any of you have watched the like Lemony Snicket's movie, Aunt Josephine is a great example of someone with like very generalized anxiety. Let me play this for you. She's afraid of everything. It's not one thing, it's everything. And that's very common with this. With everything, that's very, very common with this disorder. I had this like, you must have worried yourself to death, right? It's just constant worrying that comes with it. Anyone know someone like this? Any stories, comments, thoughts, anything? Anyone have someone in your life who kind of fits this? Always worry? Anything at all? I always feel like it fits my mother-in-law a little bit. Yeah, do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
She like ran over with the car worker because she was in the station.
Okay. Wow, all right. And like, was it, but it was more than just that, right? It was kind of
Yeah,
across
she
the
did
board.
it. So like someone was trying to come to fix her house and she tried to stop it and said, "Lodge." She fell.
Wow, okay, so like really excessive, like fear of people like trying to get her, or something, right? There was another hand, did you have a thought? Yeah.
My best friend deals with anxiety and I have a very difficult life the last couple of years. And so when I'm telling her about stuff, all of a sudden she'll be like, "Oh my gosh, it's stressing me." Like she's like just hearing about something and it doesn't less and less, it has to be less, it's just not even harsh stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
And it just triggers her.
Yeah, and it can be even other people's stuff causing you anxiety, right? It tends to be something that rather than being like super intense about any one thing, it's just across everything. Hence the generalized piece of it, right? We're going to talk about something next that's very specific, but this one is just across everything. And again, this poor person is often just worrying. And when we look at the causes or kind of the perspectives as to what fuels this, the cognitive element to it is huge. Someone who has this disorder has a lot of like basic irrational assumptions about the world, right? Like kind of inaccurate or inappropriate beliefs. And in a sense, they're doing what's called meta worrying, where you worry about the fact that you're worrying, which causes more worry, and then you worry about that, and then you just kind of worry yourself in a cycle. Okay? And so these thinking patterns get in the way. And so one of the ideas is that we have to change the way that you're thinking about the world. Right. So if you're laying there worried that the ceiling's going to fall on your head, is there any merit to that? Was there any reason to believe that the ceiling would fall? So what's going to be the worst thing that happens if you run out of lead in your pencil or your pen dies? Like kind of looking at every little thing and examining the assumptions and trying to change the view. Okay, well, how will you address that? What's the worst case scenario? And let's kind of work through each thing. And this guy here, Albert Ellis, the one who's smiling, it's always funny to me that he's smiling because he's kind of a jerk, right? This guy was very antagonistic in the way that he did his work. He would oftentimes call people's irrational beliefs like stupid, right? We're like, that's dumb. How could you possibly believe that? Just constantly challenging people's irrational beliefs. But he had a type of therapy called rational emotive therapy, where let's look at the rational explanations for things. Let's look at your beliefs and see, are they rational? Are they founded in reality, or should we change them? And if we can change them, maybe you don't have as much anxiety. And it might be working through 5 million things to get there, but it's one thing at a time. Let's look at the assumptions that you have and challenge them and see if we can change them a little bit. So there's a very big cognitive piece to this disorder. There's also a biological piece. Very common that people with a lot of anxiety have an imbalance of a neurotransmitter called GABA. GABA, which stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, or just GABA for short, people who have low levels of GABA are thought to have a lot of anxiety, right? So we can give somebody a medication if we believe that they have low levels of GABA to increase that to help calm them down. And these are very commonly used, especially a group of drugs called the benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines include drugs like Valium and Xanax. And Valium and Xanax are often used to help with anxiety, especially things like generalized anxiety or maybe even panic attacks, which we'll get to later.
but they're also very commonly abused drugs. Have you ever seen in a movie, this is a pet peeve of mine, in a movie, someone will pop like a Xanax or a Valium and they instantly feel better. They're like, oh, I'm okay now, right? That's definitely like a placebo effect. These take maybe 20 to 30 minutes to actually kick in and work. So somebody takes a drug like that and they feel better instantly. It's more about their mind and the expectation that it's going to help and work than the reality of it, because they can take a little bit of time to work. But they also tend to make you very, very sleepy. Yeah.
I've seen this guy, who's like terrified of flying.
Yeah.
And so his doctor prescribed him Xanax.
Yeah.
He was sitting there with his partner and playing, like, I'm scared, I've never taken this before, and I was having anxiety about taking it.
Yeah.
And, like, Anne was fine. But then he takes it, and as the plane's getting like loaded, you know, it's like 20-30 minutes goes by.
Yeah.
He's like, whoa. Like, wow, like I'm very sleepy, like
Yeah.
I think God is sleeping, like I'm not worried anymore, I just don't sleep.
Mm-hmm. And that sounds like a very common reaction, right? It tends to make you very drowsy and relaxed. So you don't feel that same anxiety. The second you said that on a plane, I don't know if any of you seen Bridesmaids, right? Like I love that movie, but she clearly takes like a Xanax and takes it with alcohol and starts hallucinating. There's a continental woman on the wing, right? But it very commonly abused with alcohol, but people will use it for fears of flying and panic attacks and anxiety. And it does cause that kind of reaction to it. Yeah.
My dad was a fear of flying, and he was prescribed Xanax one time. But he had a really weird reaction to it because instead of like calming him down and making him sleepy, he got like really on edge.
Oh no.
So like we were at the airport and he was like running ahead of us to get to our gate, and then like something went wrong with our flight, and we still put this to this day because we were at like the customer service thing and we were like, let mom talk to them, like you're gonna get mad, and he's like, I won't be mad, I'll be firm.
I'll be firm, right? That's funny. And sometimes people do respond. Medications are strange this way. Like 90% of people will respond one way, but then you get people who go the opposite direction. And you hear that a lot in like the side effect profiles. Sometimes medications can make it worse for people. And usually they make it better. Sometimes they can make it worse, especially things like antidepressants. But yeah, it doesn't help. You're already anxious and now you are reacting even more. Yeah.
So it's a modern family,
Mhm.
mention on camera, flight, and they take something, and then they figure out they're on the wrong flight,
Oh no.
and they have to make it to another gate,
Uh-huh.
and it takes effect.
That sounds good, right? Yeah, I mean, flights are a common source of anxiety for people. It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And instead of making me sleepy at first, like actually gave me like a lot of anxiety. Like I was a little scared to get them out, but they were putting me asleep, so I was even more scared. And I didn't even want to get in the car.
Yeah.
And then I knocked out before I even got in the car. So when I was there, like they had to bring me in on a wheelchair because like it just completely took me out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But initially it made it worse,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, and that can happen too. It's like initially it's like, oh no, this is going to be bad. And then you get so sleepy. I mean, these can literally knock you out, right? And they are sometimes given for dental procedures and things like that. I was on the edge. I hate going to the dentist. Like I would rather do anything in life. I'd rather give up cake for a year. That's saying something than go to the dentist. And yeah, but they're like, we can give you a Valium, but then we'll have to wheelchair you in and out because you'll be asleep. And I'm like, that's fine. I don't know, but go ahead, give me 2 Valium. I don't care. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
And he told me, he's like, oh, it's a baby tooth, it'll fall right out. I came back 2 weeks later with an abscess. And I was 8 at the time, and
Yeah.
he didn't put any numbing cream on my gums and stuck that needle in like 4 or 5 times. It was
Ugh.
So now every time I go to the dentist, even now, as a 22-year-old woman,
Mhm.
I cry.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, please.
Yeah.
don't do this."
Right. The dentist is a source of anxiety for a lot of people, which is why they have so many things like Valium and Xanax and laughing gas and so on, right? I'm always on the edge of needing all those things too, right? The dentist is a big one. There are really common fears, right? Which we'll talk about. And then nothing wrong with being afraid, but it can be more severe for some and require a little bit more. Right? So medications Relaxation training is another one. You can learn to calm yourself down on your own and get the same effect as a medication. It just takes time to do, right? So some people will kind of self-hypnotize and calm themselves down as a way of managing all of this. You can definitely attack it from that venue, and you can also attack it, right, from a very like cognitive lens as well. So those are the two big kind of approaches to what causes it and how we would treat it. Again, very, very general. Where we'll go next is very specific, right? Just like there's anxiety and then there's anxiety disorders, there are fears and then there are phobias. Every single one of you probably has something that you are afraid of, right? I would be willing to bet that there's something that like you're not the biggest fan of or maybe have fear of. Fear is a normal adaptive response. There are a lot of things out there that are dangerous to us, and there's nothing wrong with being afraid of heights or snakes or spiders or whatever it might be. Okay. Fear is something that protects us from things that are a threat to our well-being. It's a reaction that's both emotional and physiological, but fear can kind of go to the extreme. And when people have fear that's debilitating or crippling, we call that a phobia. Okay. So fear, normal and common. Phobia is a little less common. Something like 1 in 10 people have a phobia. And now I have a phobia of spiders. I am terrified of spiders. I'm clearly not alone. Some of you are nodding, right? I can trace my fear back to when I was little and like an event that happened, which is very common with phobias. But I'm terrified of spiders, even things like daddy long legs, which are not dangerous in the slightest. I bug bomb my office once a year, right? I'm terrified if like there are spiders in there, right? There was a tarantula in this building outside of my office last year, and I'm not joking, I thought about quitting. I was all like, I'm never coming back, because I called maintenance to come get it, and I got busy, so I didn't get to sit out there and watch if they found it, and then it was just gone. And I was convinced for like 6 months that it was in my office, like, and it just destroyed me. Like, I'm terrified of spiders, and it started when I was very little, but when I was 18, I got bit by a brown recluse spider. I was the first person in the history of this area of the Utah desert to be bit by a brown recluse. They didn't exist before me. Like, lucky me, right? I nearly lost my foot. I have a massive scar on it. It's just like this huge dip. It like nearly killed me. And I'd love to say that's where it started, but it started with daddy long legs when I was a little kid, which is, I think, why those spiders specifically scare me so much. But just talking about spiders, my palms are sweaty. And that's common with phobias, right? Like if you are terrified of something, it causes a physiological response. I'm sorry, I'll stop talking about spiders here. But that's very common with phobias. If something that scares you that much, just thinking about it is almost more than you can handle. Okay. Now it makes it very easy to prey on people when they have phobias. My family is so mean with this. They love to put plastic fake spiders in my shoes and watch me scream. So mean. Or up lampshades, like if you've ever seen the movie Arachnophobia, they love to do everything from that movie. But there are very common phobias like spiders and heights and snakes and bugs. And then there are kind of more rare ones that people have. There's literally a phobia of like everything. People can have a fear of anything. But I have a little video that introduces these, and then I'll see if any of you want to share. Yeah.
Isn't there a phobia of long words?
Probably.
But the name of the phobia is a very long word.
Yeah, right.
I remember it was like something, whatever it was called.
Yeah, isn't that awful, right? Yeah, so we're going to give you a really long term for the thing that you are terrified of, right? Yeah. Show you what happens when she sees a feather, right? The adrenaline going through her system, her heart rate shoots up, palms start to sweat. You have that very like fight or flight kind of response that happens. When you have something that you have a phobia of, your reaction is intense like that. And again, even just thinking about it can be enough to give you kind of a similar reaction. So some of the criteria for this, you have to have a significant and persistent fear, right, of an object or a situation. And it might even just be the anticipation of that object or situation. And it has to last for at least 6 months. So again, we have a kind of a duration piece that's present. So your fear is marked and out of proportion. That feather isn't going to hurt her. right? So it's out of proportion to the object, right? You might have that reaction of like it's a life or death scenario or situation, but it isn't, right? So it's out of proportion to the stimulus, right? That's present. I mean, people can have a phobia of anything, cotton balls, right? They're not going to hurt you, but somebody who's terrified of them has that really marked and obvious out of proportion fear reaction. Some other things that you see is exposure causes an immediate anxiety response. So exposure causes an immediate anxiety response. And again, it could even just be anticipation of an exposure. So thinking about it could be enough. I have to tell you, just thinking about spiders, I've looked at my water like 5 times to make sure there wasn't one in there. Like, there's not going to be a spider in my water, right? There better not be, but I've thought about it, right? Like, it's that, like, it's on your mind. It causes an immediate anxiety response. It's out of proportion to the situation. So let's see, you recognize that it's out of proportion. You know that it's out of proportion, right? You know that it's irrational, but you still can't stop your response from happening, right? So even though you know that you shouldn't be reacting that intensely, it still happens that way. You avoid the phobic stimulus. So if you're afraid of dark water, you don't go in the ocean, right? If you're afraid of flying, you don't fly. Right, you avoid whatever it is that you have a phobia of at all costs, right? You try not to think about it. You avoid any situations that might put you in that kind of a spot. And then it has that clinically significant distress and impairment and so on that comes with it. So as I mentioned, like 1 in 10 people have a phobia. I actually think it's a little higher than that. I told you I have a phobia of spiders, arachnophobia, which is very common. My partner is terrified of heights, right? Like anything that's at a height scares her and she gets all like sweaty and scared. Anyone in here have a phobia, or someone in your life have a phobia that you want to share? You don't have to, but anything, yeah.
One is just like ocean.
Mm.
Like, I think this was tied to when I first went to California, into the ocean for the first time, and I nearly drowned. I didn't know what to do when there's a wave. So I tried to run away from me,
Yeah.
which you're not supposed to do, but I can't even like on Google Earth, if I like, I don't know, go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean and zoom in, I start getting all anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one is I've heard about your sharks, and I have no idea where this came from, but I get freaked out even like in a pool. If I start to think about sharks, I'll get like a little bit of adrenaline and just like get off.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is open water, deep water, and sharks are some of the most common phobias. And they're oftentimes, sometimes phobias are inspired by movies. Like Jaws was the #1 horror movie of all time because of the number of fears of the ocean it inspired. Not that that necessarily caused yours, but thank you, Greg. Those are very common ones as well. Yeah, like over here in the back. Yeah.
I have arachnophobia.
Yeah.
A huge daddy long leg crawled up my leg in the whole class, and I just absolutely freaked out. Like I flipped my desk.
Yeah.
Like I was just absolutely not having it.
Burn the school down. We're not going back, right? Yeah.
Not any. Literally called my best friend to come to my house to kill the spider. And I won't block I won't unblock my eye contact. It's there 24/7 until it's gone.
I'm laughing because I understand. I do. Yeah.
I really do hate admitting it. I don't know why or where it came from. But for some reason, like I hate the idea of being underwater, like some any sea monster related thing.
Okay.
And I realized this because I went to Disneyland like a year ago.
Uh-huh.
And I went on the Nemo ride. And like,
You're like, what's happening?
I remember, like the first time in my life, on any ride. It was on the Nemo ride. I'm like, what are you doing, man? I'm like,
You're like, I just went off. Right, I don't want to find Nemo anymore, right? Yeah. And that's horrible if you don't know it and you get thrown into that situation. Yeah. Those rides are weird anyway, right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Since I was little, but this year when I went, I saw a shark in the water for the first time.
Mhm.
And before then I've been surfing, I've snorkeled in the ocean, like just gone right in. And ever since I saw that, this whole summer, I have not been able to go to the beach and get in the water.
Yeah.
Ever since I saw, like, it was like a sand shark too, like this big, and it just scared me because I've never seen it, so it's never been like real to me.
Sure.
So once I saw it, now I'm just like.
You're like, now I know they're there.
Yeah,
I've seen
now
it.
they're there.
Yeah, right. And again, phobias often come from something, right? They come from like an exposure to something, but then they get out of proportion very easily. Yeah.
I have a very big fear of snakes. Like I always say, like they gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put one up there.
I keep eyeing it. I always say, like they give me the heebie-jeebies. Like I can feel them crawling on me when I like think about them and stuff. And like I grew up against a hillside, so we often got snakes in our backyard. And especially as a kid, like there were a couple of times where like I almost stepped on one, and like my grandparents like would have to like take care of them for me. And like to the point where like my brother loves snakes.
Yeah.
And so like the like LA Zoo has like a fair with all the snakes.
Yeah.
And so my family would always insist on going in there, and I would like literally have to like tunnel vision through the entire thing, because if I got anywhere close to the things, I would always like the scene in Harry Potter where the like glass disappears. Like it was always worried the snakes were gonna get out somehow and just like get to me.
Yeah.
And I would just like tunnel vision, and my brother would could spend hours in there just looking at them, and I'd be like, nope, I'm good. I need to get away from these.
I don't go in there either because they have the spiders in there as well, right? I know better. I just wait outside.
Yeah, I just like at this point, like I'm just like, no, you guys have fun in the snake pit. I'm good.
I'll be out here, right?
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
My grandma and then my uncle decided to live in up here for that was just like outside. And when he was like better, he used to like fly around the house and just land on his head and just like sleep on people's heads. And it did that to me, but it like scratched my head as it did it. So then now, and then I coming in. Sure. And I learned how to fly. And then the second one is I'm afraid of the bottom. So not like the bottom of it, because I was younger, my dad threw me off the boat and I was wearing goggles and I could just see the bottom of the right there. Yeah, it was the most terrifying thing ever, and I didn't, which was like months.
Yeah.
Now I can't see.
And again, both of your phobias came from an event, right? That's so common. Phobias. There was another hand over here. So yeah.
I have two. I don't know if they're like full-on phobias, and I have no idea where they came from.
Okay.
But one, I've been scared of this since I was little. I've always like had this intense fear that someone's gonna break into my house and murder me and my family.
Okay.
And like it's like completely irrational to believe, because like we've always lived in a very safe neighborhood.
Sure.
And so I have no idea where that came from, but like I usually won't leave my room at night because I'm so scared that someone will break in. And then the other one, it's really weird. I'm scared of seaweed.
I'm curious. Seaweed. Okay.
That's totally reasonable. That's the movie reasonable.
Like I can see it on land, it's fine, only in the water. And like I won't go in the ocean alone. I love the ocean, so I can't not go in.
Sure.
But I won't go in the ocean alone because I'm so scared of seeing seaweed, and like the idea of being. Some people go snorkeling in kelp forests. Like, how do you do that? Like thinking about that.
I love that you were like, that's reasonable.
That's so
I'm good with it.
You can't tell me you have the ocean, it's still like this tiny bit of seaweed that.
Oh, I know. Yeah, and seaweed is kind of gross, just all around, right? But scary, right, for some. Yeah.
See.
Right, and that's where you see, like, again, like, we all have fears, but phobias, it's different than a fear. Like a fear you can usually push through. A phobia, it's like, nope, no, I'm out, I'm done. Like, yeah.
So she's convinced that she's one day gonna get to swim her.
Okay.
So I told her if she's able to swim in the kelp forest, then also the sharks.
That's fair.
So it's just never gonna.
Reasonable.
I said the left.
They're
Yeah.
sharks.
But you're like, no, who was with the sharks over here? You're like, don't do it, right? Anybody else? Yeah.
I think grandma or nana is petrified of snakes.
Yeah.
But we live next to the Wildwood hiking trail. So there's a lot of snakes around.
Yeah.
And I've never seen her see a snake. I talked to her about it once, and she just like got petrified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just even talking about it, thinking about it,
Yeah.
it's too much. It is. Yeah.
Sisters stingrays,
Mhm.
but not so much them just getting stung by them.
Okay.
So if you're scared of stingrays, don't go to Mexico. Because there are flying stingrays.
Oh, geez.
So we were all in the water, me and my two sisters, and all of a sudden a whole school of them comes on by, and my mom and I are just standing there, but my other two sisters basically almost drowned us, trying to like climb onto us, and these stingrays are hitting our feet, they're flying, hitting us in the face,
Mhm.
but then we're like,
Yeah, again, it's comical when it's not yours, right? When it's not your fear. Like I said, my in-laws, they're so mean with this. They used to like, my mother-in-law put a spider in my shoe, like a fake plastic spider in my shoe. And I freaked out because I put my foot in there and like I felt it, and then I like tipped the shoe and it fell out, and that was the end of me. I was done for that day. But I got her back really good, I think. That's just totally irrelevant, but I'm gonna share it with you anyway. My mother-in-law is really afraid of possession, right? Like, and so scary movies like Paranormal Activity like terrify her. And it took like 2 years to have my moment, but I waited for that moment for 2 years. And she came to stay with us this was like 15 years ago. And my father-in-law wasn't there. I think he was fishing. So it was just her. So I was like, this is my chance. I got in so much trouble for this, but it was worth every moment of it. My mother-in-law was sleeping over, and she had just done this like awful spider prank. And so in the middle of the night, I went in her room, like Paranormal Activity style, and I just stood over her bed. Waiting for her to wake up. And she didn't wake up, so I started making some noise. And she woke up, and I just stood there like motionless, expressionless, just staring at her. She fell out of the bed, peed herself. And like never spider pranked me ever again. My partner was so mad at me for doing that to her mother, but it was worth it. It was so worth it. Never spider pranked me again. So anyway, when it's your phobia, it's terrifying. When it's not, it's often kind of comical, right? Because it's so out of proportion to whatever the stimulus is. Again, there's tons of common phobias. Social anxiety is a huge one, right? It used to be called social phobia, but they actually made it its own unique disorder called social anxiety disorder now, because it's so common. I won't ask you to raise your hand if you have this, because that would be pushing you to like expose you to something, right? This is common, that speech class that we all put off, right? I don't know if any of you are putting off that speech class because you don't want to have to perform in front of others. Very common to have phobias of performing or talking in front of other people. Enough so that it's its own whole disorder. Yeah. You can take it online now. Oh my gosh, stop. I did not have that possibility. I mean, it makes sense. You can take anything online, but that's like, it feels like cheating. When I was in college, you had to take it in person. And I have, you would probably not believe this, I'm standing in front of all of you. I hate public speaking. Hate it. I know that sounds weird to say as I'm speaking to a public, but I hate it. Like I hated speech class. I wish they had it in online, right? Yeah.
yeah, I started my speech class and then COVID happened.
Yeah. Yes. Right. One little silver lining of COVID. Right? All right. What causes phobias? One of the biggest causes, something happens. Conditioning, right? Think about what scares you. Like almost everybody can trace like a phobia back to an event or an exposure or a movie. Maybe it's not super obvious, but you can often find it. It could be you saw somebody else experience something. You witnessed it in a movie. Movies have a very powerful ability to cause phobias for people, especially if you watch them when you're really young and you don't know what's real versus not real. It's very, very common that it can cause phobias that way. Two events just become associated with each other. When I was little, I want to say like 3 or 4, I got locked in a bathroom at my preschool, and there were daddy long legs in this bathroom, and they crawled all over me. And that's where my fear of spiders started. I promise that's where it started. I know it to be sure. And so it was an event, right? But it might have been a movie or something that happened to somebody else. Very, very common that that's how phobias form. But we have this conditioning that takes place. And so to get rid of a phobia, you have to recondition it in a different way. And we'll talk about that a little bit. It could be watching somebody else. There are very common phobias, but there are a lot of fears that are common. It's almost thought like they're hardwired into us. But it's almost always like a behavioral thing. And then you become afraid of it more and more and more. And the more you avoid it, the stronger the phobia often tends to get. So a lot of the treatments for phobias involve facing your fear on some level, which we'll talk about next. I have a video of that woman, Jackie, that we just watched, who faces the feather in phobia or in therapy, faces her feather phobia in therapy. But let me talk about these two things up here. There's two different ways to treat phobias, like that are commonly used anyway. One is very slow and gradual and kind, and one is like rip the band-aid off kind of method. Okay, and it's totally down to personal preference. Some people love flooding. Flooding is a way of treating fears and phobias where you face the object in like a massive exposure to get over it. So if you're afraid of heights, you go to the top of the tallest building you can find and you face that fear head on, and it makes like less of a height less scary. If you're afraid of spiders, you face the spiders head on, right? Let them crawl all over you like Fear Factor style, and you survive that and you're okay. Or you have a heart attack and die, which I think is what would happen if it were me, right? Sometimes when I'm talking about this, I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally touch that spider. And I got nervous just thinking about it. My mom's going, no, I'm not going to do it. Oh, I'll do it on my screen. How about that? Yep. You can just trust that I just did that. But it's like that idea of like, I'm going to face it head on, right? And that's the idea behind flooding. And I have a cool clip of flooding with this guy who's afraid of heights, right? And so what they do with him is they take him to the top of the tallest building. He swears, he cries, his face is bright red, right? But the idea with flooding is if you can handle a massive exposure, then you can handle like a normal exposure. If you can handle 100 stories, then 1 story, 2 stories shouldn't scare you so much anymore. It's very intense, so it's not for everybody. And you can definitely do this on your own, right? I had a student a couple of years ago who went skydiving to tackle her fear of heights, right? That would be an example of flooding, right? And she was like, it didn't go very well, but I did it a couple of times and I'm slowly getting over it. Right? She's like, I had to tip the guy really well because I was like swearing at him the whole time because he tandem jumped the first time. But let me show you what flooding can look like, and then we'll talk about the other one. Cognitive behavioral approach to this type of therapy. But with both of these, behavioral approaches work on exposures. So the idea is that you were conditioned to have this fear. We can change it through conditioning. And I don't know, if you had to pick one, like which one would you pick? Well, how many of you, like, think of whatever it is you're afraid of. Would you rather slowly, systematically work up to it, or would you rather do flooding? How many of you would pick systematic desensitization? By show of hands. Anyone flooding? Right? Just get it over with, right? I think if I flooded myself with spiders, I would die. I'd have a heart attack. I know that'd be the end of me. So give me I still have a few minutes. What I want to do, we'll pick up next time with talking about panic attacks and agoraphobia. But in my last couple of minutes, I just want to talk for a minute about that first homework assignment with the first part of the paper. So just a couple of minutes really quickly. If you are on our Canvas page and you go to assignments right here, over on the left. So here's that first part of the paper. Okay, so you're turning this into me on Canvas. So you don't have to print anything out at all. But you'll see it's due on Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. So I'll remind you again on Wednesday. But if you click on this, it's going to bring up the instructions for the paper. It's the first part's only worth 10 points. It's very brief. It's like a paragraph or two. It's less than a page by far, but you are typing it and submitting it right here where it says start assignment. Okay, so if you hit start assignment, it'll bring up like a text box, or I'm sorry, a spot where you can choose the file to upload. And you are limited, I think it's like PDF, Doc, DocX, and RTF. So if you have like a Google link, convert it and download it. Or if you have Pages, you'll have to convert it, just because Canvas doesn't handle either of those very well. But if I scroll back up, the instructions for this one, all you need to do is give me a very brief summary of who you're choosing, what the show is, and why. Okay, so, and you can change this later, but the sooner you commit to a character, the better off you'll be. So tell me which show and character you're doing and give me a short description. And then I want you to give me all the citation information for your show, but it doesn't need to be in any particular format. I just want it to be there. Okay, so like if you're doing Game of Thrones, right? You would cite Game of Thrones and who directed it and when and so on in any style or format. It doesn't need to be formatted yet. You would tell me which character and why and give me a short explanation. It's probably like a paragraph or two at the most. It's very brief. I just want you to start picking your character and then try and commit to it. And again, if you want to change it later, I would say definitely change it before part 2, because then you're starting to get into it a little more. But think of a show or a movie or a video game, just a character that interests you. And you can argue that they have a certain disorder, or you could even argue that they don't have a disorder that they were diagnosed with. I had somebody write like a super creative paper about Harry Potter that he had schizophrenia and made the whole thing up because he was abused and lived in the cabinet under the stairs. So creative. You don't have to be that creative. You can pick any character. It can be animated or real, but start thinking about it. I'll see if you have any questions about it on Wednesday, but start thinking. You can turn this in at any time, but it is due by Wednesday night at 11:59 p.m. If you did the extra credit or have anything else to turn into me, feel free to bring it up here. Otherwise, we'll keep going on Wednesday with the rest of chapter 4.
Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.